Chapter 1. The Night She Called It Her House. At 6:18 in the morning, my husband called because his card was declined, and he thought it was a bank mistake. It wasn't. 3 weeks earlier, I had discovered emails between him and his mother planning to refinance my inherited home and pull $150,000 in equity. They had already drafted a quitclaim deed with a blank signature line waiting for me. He stayed silent while she called it her house. He stayed silent while they calculated what my separate property was worth. What they did not know was that I had already spoken to a divorce attorney and moved my salary before they could touch a dollar. This is how a family refinance scheme turned into a legal revenge they never saw coming. My name is Elise Whitmore. I am 39 years old, and the house on Briar Glen Court in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, has legally belonged to me since October of 2018. My grandmother transferred the deed to me 3 months before she passed. She bought the property in cash in 1994. There has never been a mortgage, there has never been a home equity loan. The deed lists one name, mine. When I married my husband, Christopher Whitmore, in June of 2020, nothing about that changed. Inherited property in Pennsylvania remains separate property. I did not know that my mother-in-law had already contacted a mortgage broker about refinancing it. The moment everything shifted did not start with paperwork. It started on a Wednesday night in December of 2024. I was sitting on the left side of our living room couch, watching a cooking competition I have followed for years. The contestants were racing against a timer. Clear rules, clear stakes. I have always liked knowing where the boundaries are. The front door shut harder than usual. My mother-in-law, Diane Whitmore, 67, walked into the room without greeting me. She did not ask what I was watching. She stepped directly in front of me, leaned down, and pulled the remote from my hand. The screen went black. "We do not watch this kind of trash in this house," she said. "Not in my home." My home. Christopher sat across the room in his recliner, scrolling through his phone. He did not look up. He did not reach for the remote. He did not correct her. "It is just a show, Elise," he said quietly. "Do not make it bigger than it is. Do not make it bigger than it is." Diane set the remote on the coffee table as if she had restored order. She adjusted a pillow and looked around the room. "This house needs consistency," she said. "Structure." I felt something inside me go very still, because she was not talking about television. Diane moved in back in March of 2024. 2 weeks, she said. Her lease in York ended early due to maintenance issues. Temporary inconvenience. That was the story. 2 weeks became 1 month. 1 month became spring. By early summer, she had replaced my grandmother's handmade curtains with beige blinds she ordered online. She reorganized my kitchen cabinets. She introduced herself to neighbors as if she were helping manage the property. In July, I received an email from the Briar Glen Homeowners Association about complaints. Raised voices. Tension. Later, I learned Diane had been telling neighbors I struggled with stress and that she worried about her son living in an unstable environment. "She needs guidance," Diane told Mrs. Bennett across the street. "This house needs stronger direction." Stronger direction. I pay the property taxes. I handle the insurance. I schedule every inspection. I work as a benefits compliance supervisor for a regional hospital network. I review contracts and audit financial documents for a living. Structure is not something I lack. But over the past 9 months, I had started to feel like a guest in my own home. That Wednesday night when she said, "Not in my home," I looked at Christopher and waited. I waited for him to say, "Mom, this is Elisa's house," or even just, "Give it back." He did not. "You are overreacting," he said. "She just likes things a certain way." Diane smiled slightly. "In a marriage, assets are shared, dear." Assets. The word did not belong in that room, not over a cooking show. I stood up slowly and placed the blanket on the couch. "This is my house," I said. She tilted her head. "Everything changes over time." Christopher said nothing. I walked upstairs. Behind me, the television came back on, this time tuned to a news channel Diane prefers, loud enough to carry through the hallway. My moth office sits at the end of the second floor, overlooking the maple tree my grandmother planted when I was 16. I stepped inside and locked the door. On my desk was a thick folder I had hidden in the bottom drawer 3 weeks earlier. Because 21 days before that night, I tried to log in to our joint bank account to download a tax document and discovered the password had been changed. Christopher told me he updated security. While resetting access, I found an email thread I was never meant to see. Adding name to deed. I printed every message. Diane had reached out to a mortgage broker in Lancaster asking about refinancing options if the property were retitled jointly. There were projections attached, estimated equity access, scenarios based on adding a second owner. $150,000 in potential available equity. She had not been rearranging curtains, she had been calculating. There were follow-up emails about timelines, about required documentation, about converting sole ownership into joint title. Christopher had replied to some of them. Not once did he mention it to me. Downstairs, I heard Diane laugh at something on television. Christopher's voice answered, calm and easy. My chest felt tight, but my thoughts were clear. This was not about a remote. It was about positioning. Diane had been moving through my house like someone preparing to claim it, testing language, building sympathy, talking about shared assets, asking brokers about refinance scenarios. Not in my home. She was not just staying here, she was preparing to take it. I pulled the copy of the deed from the folder and laid it flat on the desk. My name appeared alone at the top of the page. Sole owner. I traced the letters slowly. For 9 months I had chosen patience. I had chosen to believe this was temporary. I had chosen to avoid conflict. But patience is not surrender. They assumed I would sign if asked calmly enough. They assumed I would not read carefully. They assumed ownership could be softened through repetition. They were wrong. I closed the folder and rested both hands on top of it. Downstairs, the television volume rose again. I did not feel angry. I felt certain. They thought I would not act. They had already begun planning around that belief.
Chapter 2. The Money Trail. The first crack showed up on a Tuesday afternoon when I tried to download our property tax statement and realized I could not log into our joint account. The password had been changed. I told myself it was routine. Maybe Christopher updated security. Maybe he forgot to mention it. We had been married 4 years. Small things happened. I found him in the kitchen that evening. "Did you change the bank password?" I asked. "Yeah," he said without looking up. "There was a fraud alert. I reset it." "Why?" "Because I cannot get in. I will send it to you later." He never did. That night, after he fell asleep, I reset access through recovery. That was when I saw the folder. Adding name to deed. I opened the email thread and felt my pulse shift. His mother, Diane Whitmore, had forwarded a message from a mortgage consultant in Lancaster County. The email outlined refinance scenarios if the property were retitled jointly. It listed projected equity access based on current market value. Home value, $230,000. Potential available equity, $150,000. There were follow-up emails, questions about timeline, about how quickly a quitclaim deed could be processed, about what documentation would be required if both spouses were listed on title. Christopher had replied, "We are working on it. She just needs reassurance." Reassurance? We had never discussed refinancing. The house was paid off. There was no mortgage, no line of credit, no reason to touch the equity. Unless the reason was not stability. Unless the reason was access. I printed every email. The next morning, I pulled our credit report. That was when I saw the Discover card. Opened April of 2023. Balance $14,860. Automatic payment $412 each month from our joint account. My salary from Riverband Medical Network was just over $90,000 a year. Christopher earned about $48,000 managing warehouse operations. I paid the property taxes, I handled the homeowner's insurance, I covered most repairs. I went back through statements month by month. Venmo transfers stood out. $300, $500, $450. Over 8 months, they totaled $6,240. Each payment went to an account under a nickname I did not recognize. I called the bank. The representative confirmed the account was linked to a phone number registered to Diane. I sat very still. That evening, I confronted her in the kitchen. "I noticed Venmo transfers connected to your number," I said, "about $6,000. She did not flinch. "That was for my heart medication. I did not want to burden you." "I work in healthcare compliance, Diane. Medicare covers most of your prescriptions." Her expression hardened. "So now you are auditing me?" "I am asking why money left our joint account without a conversation." "It's family," she said sharply. "Families support each other." Christopher stepped in. "Elise, do not do this." "Do what?" "Make it sound like we are stealing from you." I looked at him. "You changed the bank password, you opened a credit card, your mother contacted a mortgage consultant about refinancing my house, and I'm making it sound wrong?" "You are overreacting," he said. "It was just an inquiry." "An inquiry about adding your name to the deed?" "That's normal for married couples," he said, "putting both names on property." "Without telling the person who owns it?" He exhaled hard. "You are acting paranoid." "Paranoid?" Diane folded her arms. "This house would be more secure if it were in both your names. It protects everyone." "Protects who?" "You make more money," she said. "It balances things." Balance. The word felt calculated. The credit card debt, the Venmo transfers, the refinance inquiry, the quitclaim deed discussion. This was not about debt. This was about control. The password change, the credit card, the Venmo transfers, the refinance inquiry, the deed draft. It was a sequence, and it led in one direction. I closed the laptop slowly and looked again at the draft quitclaim deed with my name printed at the top. They were not asking for partnership. They were positioning for ownership. And if I had not checked that email that night, the next document in front of me would have required my signature. Chapter 3. The Long Game. I did not sleep that night after finding the draft deed. By morning, I was sitting in a law office in Harrisburg across from Carolyn Mercer, the property attorney whose name I had saved the week before. I placed the deed, the refinance emails, the credit card statements, and the draft quitclaim document on her desk. She read everything carefully. "You inherited the property before marriage?" she asked. "Yes, October 2018. My grandmother left it to me outright."
And you have never refinanced or retitled it? Never. She nodded once. Under Pennsylvania law, inherited property remains separate property unless you voluntarily convert it. If you sign that quitclaim deed and add your husband's name, you transform it into marital property. The word transform felt heavier than convert. So if I do nothing, I said, the house stays mine. If you do nothing and you do not commingle ownership, yes. What about my paycheck in the joint account? You may move your earned income into an account solely in your name before filing. Do not touch his wages. Document every transfer. Precision protects you. And his mother living there. If she pays no rent and has no lease, she is a month-to-month occupant. You serve a 30-day written notice. 30 days. Clear, predictable, legal. I left her office with instructions and a timeline. They had moved from conversation to paperwork. If I waited, the next step would not require persuasion, it would require my signature. Day 1. I scanned the deed and my grandmother's will and uploaded encrypted copies to secure storage. Day 3. I opened a new account at a credit union across town under my name only. Day 7. I updated my direct deposit with Riverbend Medical Network so most of my salary would route to the new account. Every step went into a spreadsheet. Date, time, amount. I was not reacting, I was protecting assets. On day 10, I called Christopher's older sister, Melissa Carter, in Toledo. I need to ask you something about your mother, I said. She listened quietly while I described the refinance emails and the draft deed. There was a long pause. She tried something similar in 2016, Melissa said finally, with Uncle Raymond and his cabin near Put-in Bay. She pushed to have her name added so she could manage it. When he refused, she told everyone he was ungrateful. So this is not new. No, Melissa said, it is a pattern. That word steadied me. Pattern. Meanwhile, the social pressure escalated. In September, the Briar Glen Community Association sent another notice about disturbances. A board member requested a meeting. Diane had been speaking to neighbors about tension in the house. One afternoon, I overheard her in the driveway. I worry about my son, she was saying. The stress here is unhealthy. I stepped forward. The stress began when refinance emails were sent without my knowledge, I said calmly. Her smile tightened. Christopher confronted me later. You embarrassed her. She is undermining me publicly. You see manipulation everywhere. There it was again, manipulation. One evening in late November, Diane clutched her chest at dinner. I feel dizzy, she whispered. Christopher was on his feet instantly. We drove her to urgent care. The physician concluded it was anxiety. On the way home, he turned toward me. You could show more compassion. I drove her there. You always assume strategy. I almost doubted myself. Almost. But that night I opened the spreadsheet again. $6,240 in transfers. $14,860 in credit card debt. Projected refinance access of $150,000. This was not random, this was financial positioning. If I delayed, they would finalize the refinance inquiry, they would formalize the deed, they would close the window before I acted. On December 12th at 9:47 in the evening, I sat at my desk with both laptops open. My new account was active. I transferred $18,300, the portion of the joint balance directly traceable to my pay deposits. I left his earnings untouched. Then I called the bank. I need to restrict overdraft access and temporarily limit debit transactions on this joint account due to suspected unauthorized activity. The representative confirmed the security hold. I documented the time, 9:58 p.m. I opened my email and wrote one word to Carolyn. Go. Her reply arrived within minutes. I am filing the divorce petition tomorrow morning. Divorce petition. Asset protection. Separate property. I printed the divorce filing and the 30-day notice to terminate month-to-month occupancy. The paper felt solid in my hands. I walked downstairs. Christopher was on the couch. Diane was watching the news. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table. "What is that?" he asked. "You will read it," I said. Diane's eyes narrowed. "You are destroying this family." "No," I said evenly. "I am protecting what is legally mine." Christopher stood up. "You cannot just do this." "I already did." For the first time since the password changed, I did not feel uncertain. Upstairs, I set my alarm for 6:15. They still believed I would hesitate. By morning, they would understand that the long game was mine. Chapter 4. Declined. My phone rang at 6:18 in the morning. I was already awake when Christopher's name lit up the screen. "My card just got declined," he said. "I'm at the Exxon on Front Street." "It was restricted," I replied calmly. "What do you mean, restricted?" "I placed a temporary security hold on the joint account due to documented, unauthorized activity." "You froze our money." "I protected my income." There was a pause, then a sharp breath. "This is insane." "No, this is legal." I ended the call and walked downstairs. Diane was standing at the kitchen table with the envelope open, the divorce petition in one hand and the 30-day notice in the other. She stormed upstairs and pounded on my bedroom door. "What is this?" I opened the door fully. "It is a divorce filing and a lawful 30-day notice terminating month-to-month occupancy." Christopher came up behind her. "You cannot do this. I have rights." "So do I." "You cannot evict my mother from our house." "It is not our house." His jaw tightened. "I live here." "You live in property inherited before marriage and held as separate property. The deed lists only my name." Diane crossed her arms. "We will call the police." I picked up my phone. "I will put my attorney on speaker." Caroline answered immediately. "Good morning." Christopher spoke first. "She cannot throw my mother out." Caroline's voice remained steady. "The property is separate property inherited prior to marriage. The recorded deed lists only Miss Whitmore. A 30-day written notice is sufficient under Pennsylvania law. Law enforcement will not remove a lawful owner in a civil ownership dispute." Diane scoffed. "You coached her." "I advised her," Caroline corrected. Christopher turned to me. "You are destroying this family." "I attempted to refinance my inherited home without my knowledge." His eyes flickered. "What refinance?" Diane said quickly. I held up the printed email thread and the draft quitclaim deed. The refinance inquiry sent to a mortgage consultant in Lancaster County, the projection of $150,000 in available equity, the quitclaim deed template prepared for my signature. Diane's composure slipped. "It was only an inquiry." "So you did contact a mortgage consultant." She hesitated. Christopher looked at her. "Mom?" "She was exploring options for stability." "Without telling the homeowner?" Christopher turned back to me. "You went through my account. You changed the password. You had no right." "I had every right. The joint account contains primarily my salary. I documented $6,240 in transfers. I documented $14,860 in undisclosed credit card debt. I documented projected refinance access to $150,000 in equity." The room felt smaller. Diane tried again. "This house would be safer in both your names." "For who?" "For my son. For in case something happens? Something like a refinance that converts separate property into marital property?" Christopher's shoulders dropped. "That was not finalized, but it was drafted. I placed the quitclaim template on the dresser. You were not asking for partnership, you were positioning for ownership." Diane's voice rose. She poisoned you against your own family. I dialed Melissa and put her on speaker. Melissa, tell them about Uncle Raymond. Her voice came through clearly. Mom tried to get her name added to his cabin in 2016. When he refused, she called him selfish for years. Christopher stared at his mother. Is that true? It was different, she muttered. It was the same. Silence filled the room. Christopher looked at me. You filed for divorce. Yes. When? 9 this morning. The petition has been submitted. The word divorce settled heavily in the air. Diane's confidence cracked. You would tear apart your marriage over paperwork. You attempted to corner me with paperwork. I answered with law. Christopher sat on the edge of the bed. This is extreme. No, this is asset protection. Diane's voice softened, almost pleading. You are heartless. I am prepared. Christopher's tone shifted. What happens now? You have 30 days to relocate. He looked up sharply. That's it? That's the law. Diane stepped forward again. You cannot force us out. I'm not forcing, I'm enforcing. Caroline spoke once more through the phone. If you have questions about relocation timelines, you may retain separate counsel. No one spoke. The threat of police was gone. The refinance plan was exposed. The deed lay between us like a verdict. For months they controlled the atmosphere through pressure and suggestion. Now documentation carried more weight than their voices. Christopher finally looked at me without anger. You really planned this. I documented it. A long quiet settled over the room. Control had never come from emotion. It came from ownership. And for the first time since the password changed, they understood exactly whose name was on the deed.
Chapter 5: Restoration. The house felt different after they left. Not louder, not quieter, just clear. Within a week, the divorce filing moved through Dauphin County Court without resistance. Service was completed. Christopher retained separate counsel. There were no sudden claims on the deed, no emergency motions, no last-minute attempts to argue ownership. The paperwork was simple. Inherited property, separate property, sole owner. The refinance inquiry ended quietly. The mortgage consultant sent a final response stating there was no eligibility to proceed without ownership interest. $150,000 in projected equity access vanished with a single sentence. They had wanted access. They lost it. Christopher enrolled in financial counseling to address the $14,862 in credit card debt. It would take time to pay down, but it was no longer hidden inside my silence or funded by my hesitation. The Briar Glen Community Association withdrew its written warning after reviewing documentation confirming ownership and residency changes. Complaints dissolved when confronted with records. Gossip weakens in the presence of proof. 3 weeks after filing, Christopher moved into a short-term rental across town. Diane left with him. She did not speak to me when she carried her last box to the car. I watched from the living room window, not with satisfaction, but with understanding. Control had shifted the moment documentation replaced persuasion. The first Saturday alone in the house, I opened every window despite the cold. Air moved freely through rooms that had carried tension for months. I removed the curtains Diane had installed and folded them carefully. From the back of the hallway closet, I retrieved the floral curtains my grandmother had sewn decades ago. They still smelled faintly of cedar. I ironed them slowly. When I hung them back in place, the kitchen looked like memory instead of negotiation. I replaced the framed prints Diane preferred with black and white photographs of my grandmother standing in front of this house in 1992. She had rebuilt her life here after loss. She never apologized for protecting what she worked for. I understood her more clearly now. One evening, I stood at the counter and rewrote her peach cobbler recipe from memory. The original card had been thrown away months earlier. 2 cups of flour, ½ cup of sugar, butter cut into cubes. Some things survive removal.
The first time I sat down with the remote in my hand, there were no footsteps approaching, no commentary about what belonged in the house. I turned on a cooking show and let it play. My phone vibrated. Christopher. I opened the message. I am sorry, I should have said something sooner. He did not mention the refinance attempt. He did not mention the draft quitclaim deed. He did not mention the equity projection. He mentioned silence. That was the fracture. Not the money, not the paperwork. The silence in the moment someone claimed my space and he did nothing. I set the phone face down. Apologies acknowledge delay. They do not erase intention. 2 weeks later, the preliminary divorce hearing confirmed what had always been true. The house remained solely mine. Separate property, protected asset, legal ownership unchanged. They had wanted equity. They lost entry. They had wanted control. They found limits. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and looked around the room. The curtains were mine. The photographs were mine. The silence was mine. I understood something clearly then. Control never belonged to the loudest voice. It belonged to the name recorded on the deed, and that name had never changed. If you were in my position, would you have moved your salary before filing divorce? And when a spouse stays silent while someone else reaches for your home, would you see that silence as hesitation or betrayal? Would you have trusted him again? I want to hear what you would have done.